end of our trip. We're just 100 some odd miles away from Los Angeles. It's been more than a week of driving from city to city. We travel, in this case, differently than you do. It's all about the travel, and the destination is just a short point on the map. The events, what we've seen, what we've done, people we've talked to, some of that blurs together, which makes the true standouts, the really interesting parts of the trip, that much more interesting because we remember them among this blur of concrete and tarmac and getting in and out of cars and filling them up with gasoline. Car just came in from Magadan, Russia by cargo plane a couple of days late thanks to Russian bureaucracy, but we're here now, we're airing it out after Ed Lowe's run, and we're ready to drive to the Yukon Territory in Canada. Day 2 of the final leg that takes us through North America. We started in Anchorage, Alaska yesterday. We made a stop by beautiful Knik River. We saw the glacier further into Alaska. Now we're off to Teslin. We met some really interesting people along the way. We noticed this rather odd van. We went to talk to the people who own the van, and it turned out to be an East German-built Hanomag Mercedes van. The man and the woman in the van, Bill and Penny Howe, very interesting people. Turns out that 24 years earlier they circumnavigated the globe on their bicycles. Well, now they're older. They can't do that anymore, but they spoke of how that 1986 trip on the bicycles changed their lives. So they've started up again, and they were on their way heading south along the coastal road, and they're going to circumnavigate the globe again in their 1974 Mercedes Hanomag van. And we met another remarkable person, a remarkable traveler, and this man named Stephen Weinberg is driving a Renault 4CV along the route of the original 1908 New York to Paris rally. So, you know, here we are on this, I think, you know, pretty remarkable trip, and, you know, we find people who are taking it a step further, if you will, in older cars and trucks that you might think might not make it around the world the way they will. Okay, we're done with Teslin in the Yukon, and now it's off to Fort Nelson. This is the Signpost Forest. It's in Watson Lake. Back in 1942, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers started building the Alaska Highway. It's about 1,500 miles between Dawson Creek, British Columbia, and Fairbanks, Alaska. They started putting up these signs, posting these signs showing how far it is to their hometowns, to their to other parts of the world, and of course it kind of took off. Since then, Watson Lake, the Signpost Forest, has become kind of a repository for tourists who come in and bring their own signs, license plates. So if you ever find yourself along the Alaska Highway, make sure you bring a sign. As we continued on, we drove through Alaska. I found a moose. I yelled, "Moose!" And, you know, we didn't quite have the cameras ready to capture it in time, but for me, you know, seeing a moose, when it comes to seeing animals you don't see back in Michigan or back in LA, moose is pretty much it for me. That was kind of the highlight in terms of the animals. We saw more of them. Today is the longest day of the North American tour. It's 528 miles in that direction toward Prince George, British Columbia. Riverfront Road was a really fun, twisty road we found somewhere in northern British Columbia. We were in a mountain area and we had the river road, and instead of being on a tall cliff overlooking some water, we were right there on the water. Well, it's a four-front drive car, fairly minimal understeer, just the right amount of body roll, doesn't beat you up on the bumps, so it's compliant enough and yet fun handling, good steering, a lot of good feedback in the steering, and the right kind of weight. Me personally, I would have preferred a full stick shift, which is available in this car, and unfortunately that's not what we got for now. Later on, south in British Columbia, on our way to Whistler, we found this road that took us a little bit off course, but it was a mountain road, dirt road, and it skirted along some farmland, some private property, but it was a public road, 2-lane at best, and some blind corners, but trying to use some care, we drove through it as if we were rally drivers. Which makes me want Suzuki to do a rally version of this car. This maybe not, say, a Subaru WRX STI, but at least a Subaru WRX kind of car. Something with more power, manual only, I think, and maybe a little bit less compliance, but certainly for many drivers, and even the enthusiast driver, the handling on the car is already pretty good, so a little tweaking and you might have a WRX competitor with this car. We got in late last night into Prince George, British Columbia after a long drive. More great mountain roads, nice and twisty. Today's a little bit shorter. We're on our way to Vancouver, so stick with us. Well, the sights that we saw, what does stand out? Well, here's where it blurs, but it blurs in a good kind of way because there was just so much natural beauty. It's this desolate kind of beauty, beautiful mountains, and these huge crystal clear lakes right next to them. You can see forever. It's basically an alive bit of landscape, if you will. This is Lord Stanley Park in the beautiful city of Vancouver, British Columbia. Now, we don't have enough time here. We could use a lot more time and enjoy the city, but we did spend the morning in Granville Island. On Granville Island, we met Steven Weinberg, who is driving his 1959 Renault 4CV around the world. Another adventure. Somehow they all end up in this part of the world. All right, well, stage 3 of Tokyo to LA the hard way is starting to wind down. We entered the United States again yesterday out of Vancouver, drove through Washington, and now we're here in Portland, Oregon, ready to take off for points south. All right, we're really getting close now. We're almost there. We're almost at the Motor Trend Towers in El Segundo. I can see the planes landing at LAX from there. What's the difference between stage 3, our trip from Anchorage to LA, and the other stages? Of course, in Japan they drove on the other side of the road with a left-hand drive car. Now, it's also a much smaller, compact country. They got through it pretty quickly. Okay, obviously when Angus handed it off to Ed, he encountered a lot of difficulties in Russia that you wouldn't find elsewhere. The Road of Bones up in Siberia, for example. These are roads that people take just because they have to go from point A to point B. When the car got to Anchorage and we drove it down through 4 states and 2 provinces, we were there because we wanted to be there, along with a lot of the other traffic, especially up in Alaska and in Yukon and in BC. We saw a lot of travelers from other places there. This is part of what it's about to be driving in North America, is that we use the car for these, big expansive road trips, and the destination is often not as big as the trip itself. The way we were driving, long drives, 400, 500 miles every day, kind of like the way you drove with your parents when you were a kid, where your dad would insist on crossing 2 or 3 states at a time to get to your destination. The difference, of course, is once you got to your destination, you stayed there. We just kind of kept on going and covered something like 3,600 miles in about a week. So we had fun doing that. Very typical North American drive, and I wouldn't give it up for anything.